In a very remarkable state visit recently, India and Qatar has elevated their bilateral partnership to a strategic partnership.
The trade today between India and Qatar is about
$14 billion.
Both leaders signed an agreement establishing the partnership, reflecting their commitment.
India and Qatar have elevated their bilateral ties to a strategic partnership, marking a significant step in strengthening.
Qatar also announced a commitment to invest $10 billion in India.
The state visit of Qatar's Amir on 17th and 18th of February to India. So on 17th and 18th of February, Qatar's Amir was on a state visit to India, and it also coincided with the meeting of India-Qatar Joint Business Forum, where the commerce ministers of both the countries were in place alongside different other leaders, senior leaders, stakeholders in the field of Qatari finance, energy, infrastructure and technology as well. And this upgradation of bilateral partnership into a strategic partnership by India and Qatar is a very historic and diplomatic move. Now, the visit by Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani is a very historic one. That is, this is once in the last 10 years where Sheikh Al Thani has visited India. The last time when he visited India was in the year 2015. And this visit was definitely expected because our External Affairs Minister S. Shankar has travelled to Doha the late June and December of 2024, and then again over the period of New Year. So after all these things, the backdrop was laid, and the visit of Sheikh Al Thani to India, a state visit of Sheikh Al Thani, the Amir of Qatar, to India, again paved a very important way in the diplomatic relationship, the bilateral relationship of both the countries, and streamlining the bilateral relationship together. See, India's relationship with Qatar is not just associated with liquefied natural gas LNG, or it's not just a trade partnership between the countries. It goes outside the boundary line as well, where Qatar is holding a very significant position, a very significant geostrategic position in the geopolitics of Middle East as well, where both the future of Gaza and the broader stability of the region of Middle East is at stake. So here the Qatar plays a very, very important role, and India's role with Qatar, or India's relationship with Qatar, also streamlines India's role in the Middle East region as well. Now, as I told you, the Qatar's Amir has visited India in 2015 as well, and the 2015 visit of Sheikh Al Thani has yielded an elaborate joint statement that reflected cooperation between India and Qatar in different areas across different sectors, and India's desire to help the objectives of Qatar's Vision 2030, which is again a very marvelous document for development of Qatar and Qatar's vision of 2030. And in this last 1 decade, India and Qatar, diplomatically, at ministers level, at joint secretaries level, at external affairs ministers level, they have worked very hard to elevate their bilateral ties. And they have repeatedly negotiated challenges to their relationship arising either out of any bilateral issue or due to any regional tension or Gulf tensions. Now, let's see historically in the last 10 years, where has the diplomatic relationship of India and Qatar went? So in 2015, also in 2016, our Honorable Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi ji had personally outreached and reciprocated state visits which were focusing on diasporic issues. Because see, a lot of diaspora of India works in Qatar as labor. So their treatment and how they are treated and what are their working conditions, our Prime Minister has repeatedly talked about these things to the Qatar counterpart. And also, there have been several assurances from Qatar's side for labor reforms, and also these things have featured very occasionally in the discussions of our Prime Minister with Qatar's Amir. Now, at that time, some rough edges appeared in the relationship between the two due to one issue, that was $1 billion penalty, which was imposed on India's Petronet, which faced the breach of contract with Qatar's RAS gas. Now, after focused diplomacy, after very targeted diplomacy, it led to Doha, that is the capital of Qatar, both waiving off this whole penalty and also slashing the gas price of India by almost 50%. Also, one more thing happened in 1st of December 2023, where our Prime Minister met Qatar's Amir and the sidelines of COP28 summit, climate summit, which was happening in Dubai. And it led to Qatar mitigating the death sentence, which was on India's Navy veterans, which were imprisoned in Qatar on espionage charges. So in that respect also, India and Qatar's relationship navigated through tough times. India and Qatar over the last 1 decade has seen its relationship getting deepened. One in relation to trade sector, that is economic sector, but other than that as well, diplomatically and geopolitically, India and Qatar's closeness has played a very integral role in India's positioning of Middle East as well. That is how India positions itself in the area of Middle East. Now let's talk about one thing, that was about Qatar-Arab League's conflict.
Ever since Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain and Egypt imposed a land, air and sea blockade on Qatar in June 2017, the Gulf Cooperation Council has been at odds.
Now, Qatar Arabs League diplomatic crisis that happened in the year 2017, which led to an air, land and water blockade of Qatar by different countries like Saudi Arabia, UAE, Egypt and Bahrain. So Saudi Arabia, UAE, Egypt and Bahrain, they blockaded Qatar region through air, land and sea routes. From 2017 to 2021 this happened, and this crisis had a severe disabling impact on India's effort to elevate its relationship with Qatar. And at that point of time, Qatar was supplying half of India's LNG needs. That is India's liquefied natural gas needs. Half of it was supplied by Qatar. Which again, this sea blockade, this land blockade and air blockade of Qatar by these countries, it impacted the supply chains in a very negative way. So that is where the relationship again went into a turbulent phase. However, India's diplomatic response was a bit mellowed down, which talked about constructive dialogue and also peaceful resolution of the conflict. Now, one major trigger for this blockade done by Saudi Arabia, UAE and other countries for Qatar was Qatar's relationship or Qatar's ties, that is Doha's ties, with Islamist organizations like Muslim Brotherhood and several of its offshoots, and also including major terrorist groups in Middle East as well. But why Qatar is very important and why Qatar became strong after this was that Qatar converted this crisis into an opportunity. It leveraged this position to host diplomatic events, to host diplomatic interactions between the states and these groups. Now, a classic example of this can be seen during the Taliban crisis in Afghanistan. So when US was withdrawing from Afghanistan and Taliban was taking over, Taliban had a permanent office in Doha. So when Taliban set up a permanent office in Doha, it allowed US to negotiate with the officials of Taliban in the year 2020. And it led to agreement of US and Taliban, which eventually after 1.5 years, Taliban would take control over Afghanistan after US withdraws its troops from the region. And during this period only, it allowed India's outreach to Taliban as well. So India's outreach, first diplomatic outreach to Taliban, happened in Doha itself. That is, it happened in the capital city of Qatar, when our Indian ambassador Deepak Mittal met Sher Abbas Tanikzai, who was the head of Taliban's Doha political office. And that meeting happened in the August of 2021. Now, more recently, if we talk about the Israel-Hamas issue or Israel-Lebanon issue, recently we have seen that Israel-Hamas has come to an agreement.
Israel and Hamas have agreed to a ceasefire. The deal will offer at least a pause in the war.
Into breaking news this morning. After 11 days of conflict, Israel has agreed to a ceasefire with Palestinian militants.
The militant group has also agreed
to hand over some of the bodies of the dead hostages.
The conflict began after Hamas militants carried out a cross-border attack on Israel in October 2023.
In that also, very major role has been played by Qatar, because Qatar has had a long-standing relationship with that of Hamas, with the leadership of Hamas, and it played a crucial mediating role in the agreement alongside Egypt. So Qatar and Egypt, they played a crucial mediating role, and after 15 months of war in Gaza by Hamas and Israel, it culminated into a ceasefire, as we saw recently in January of 2025. So January 2025 ceasefire, more of it can be credited, the agreement between the two parties, Israel and Hamas, can be credited to Egypt and Qatar as well, because of Qatar's relationship with those organizations. So basically, after this agreement, recently in January of 2025, it has actually made Qatar a very good diplomatic heavyweight in the region. In the whole of Middle East, Qatar has now become a diplomatic heavyweight with a very good amount of diplomatic power and diplomatic success. And now it is out of the shadow of United Arab Emirates, UAE and Saudi Arabia as well. Also, very recently you would have seen in Syria, the fall of Bashar al-Assad's government. It has again put Qatar into a geopolitical opportune space. And after Assad's fall, Qatar has emerged as a financier to the transition government in Syria. The government which will be transitioning in Syria and has taken power after Assad's fall has been financed by the Qatar's government. So again, Qatar's role in Syria has now become again more nuanced and pronounced. And over the last many years, Qatar has also had several liberalized reforms. Qatar has liberalized several of its trade sectors and also socio-economic structures to extend free healthcare, free education to non-citizens as well. So many Indians, they got an opportunity to become a citizen of Qatar because of these socio-economic structural changes. And in 2018, it offered permanent residency. So now several Indians are permanent residents of Qatar in particular areas of select groups of expatriates. Now this include Indians, and also several visa restrictions of about 80 countries were removed from Qatar, including India, which boosted international travel, international tourism to Qatar amidst the Gulf blockade. While the Gulf blockade was going on, Qatar was doing all these socio-economic structural changes in order to ensure that travel and tourism in Qatar is boosted. So it would be right for us to say that Qatar opened up to the world while it was close to Gulf. Now, since we are aware of some historic ties between India and Qatar and a brief history of Qatar in the last 10 years and how Qatar has emerged as a power in the region, in the Middle East region and in the world as well, one very important thing for us to understand is the bilateral relationship between India and Qatar, especially economic. So now in the recent state visit of Sheikh Al Thani in India, the target for our bilateral trade has been doubled to $28 billion. So basically India and Doha had doubled the target of $28 billion trade per year by the year 2030. So that is now the target for us, that by the year 2030, our bilateral trade per year should be around $28 billion, which is again massive. India is currently the second largest trading partner of Qatar, which again makes India a very big economic player when we talk about bilateral relationship between Qatar and other nations. Because Qatar is the second largest trading partner. And also alongside this, definitely our bilateral relationship has been established, enhanced and expanded to strategic partnership as well, which makes the cooperation of India and Qatar in different other areas like technology, energy, economic, defense and different other areas even more robust. And also, Qatar's sovereign wealth fund has invested around $1.5 billion in India so far, and they have also committed an additional $10 billion into different sectors in India like infrastructure, healthcare, renewable energy, emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, machine learning as well. So basically, investment of Qatar in India is bound to increase after this visit. Again, this makes this visit very, very critical. And also a revised agreement on double taxation avoidance agreement has been made between the countries, again to avoid a double taxation of people between India and Qatar. And also the most important thing is that negotiation of both the countries are going on in relation to a free trade agreement. So both the countries have discussed about the possibility of a free trade agreement in future. And as you all know, negotiations of India is going on for a FTA with Gulf Cooperation Council, GCC. And Qatar is a very prominent member of Gulf Cooperation Council. So if India is able to successfully put a FTA or have a FTA with GCC, India and Qatar's relationship, bilateral relationship, is going to enhance even further. Now the question which you should ask is that why Qatar is so important for India? One hint I've already given you. For India's energy security, Qatar is very, very vital and very, very important. Let's see how. So if we talk about the last year, that is year 2024, for the first 11 months, Qatar supplied around 50% of our LNG requirements. So 50% of our imports of LNG were done from Qatar, which accounted for around $11.49 billion. Also, around 28-29% of our LPG imports is also done from Qatar. So Qatar is also a major supplier of liquefied petroleum gas as well to our country, which makes Qatar and India very close energy cooperation partners. And a very close partnership between India and Qatar is required while India is transitioning from non-renewable sources of energy to renewable sources of energy. In this energy transition of India and in this phase, India's relationship with Qatar would be very, very vital and extremely important. Now, India's largest LNG importer is Petronet LNG, which has a long-term contract with Qatar for supplying around 7.5 million tons per annum, that is MTPA of LNG. So 7.5 million tons per annum LNG is to be supplied by Qatar to Petronet LNG, which is an Indian company. And only last year, this contract has been extended till the year 2048. Now, according to Paris-based International Energy Agency, they've said that India is seen requiring more than 60% more LNG than the 2023 levels by the year 2030. So India would require 60% more LNG as compared to what it did in 2023 by the year 2030, which makes our requirement around 103 billion cubic meters by the year 2030. While LNG imports, they are set to double between the year 2023 and 2030. And it would be reaching around 65 BCM, that is billion cubic meters by the year 2030. By the year 2013 to 2023, India's LNG demand, it increased by 70%. By 2023, it's around 36 billion cubic meters BCM. By 2030, that is in 7 years from 2023, our import requirement would be around 65 billion cubic meters a year of LNG, liquefied natural gas, which means almost double. And this represents an annual growth of 11% LNG requirement from 2023 to 2030. And that is why India's oil and gas companies, they're scouting for LNG supply in different parts of the world as well, and making contracts with countries of France, making contracts with the US and Abu Dhabi and different other nations as well. And many Indian companies, corporations are making contracts with other countries, with other countries and other countries' corporations. Now, around this time, when we see that India would be requiring more of LNG in future, and import of LNG by India is going to rise in future, Qatar would play a very dominant role and important role in supplying LNG to India. because Qatar is a very big producer of LNG in the world. And Qatar is also trying to enhance its production capacity, its productive capacity of LNG, which will again help in fueling the demand of India. But in all this discussion, we haven't discussed about the US factor till now. Because in this cooperation of India and Qatar on the basis of LNG, one of the biggest competitor to Qatar for LNG supply is United States of America. And now since Donald Trump has taken over, he's talking a lot about export of gas, especially natural gas, to the whole world, whereby he has uplifted several bans which were imposed by Biden administration on several natural gas companies also. Because he's wanting to export more and more liquefied natural gas to the world. So US is world's largest LNG exporter and is currently India's second largest source of import of LNG after Qatar. So first largest is Qatar. We import maximum amount of LNG from Qatar. In the second place, it is the US. And also India and US. They both have agreed to take steps to make US a leading supplier of oil and gas in India, which would bridge the trade deficit gap between India and US. And that is what US President Donald Trump said after meeting Prime Minister Narendra Modi in Washington last week only, that is in February of 2025 only. So after this discussion, the state visit has taken place. So you see the timing, that while India and US are discussing that US will become the largest trade partner, largest oil and gas supplier to India, in the same place, during the same period of time, Qatar's Amir also visits India and talks about doubling the trade. So you see, both the countries are in a way competing with each other to be a major LNG supplier to India, because see, India's demand is very huge. And as we saw in the IEA report, that by 2030, our demand is going to be doubled, which is why the capacity of our imports should also be increasing, and we should be importing more in the coming 7 years, in the coming 5 years to be specific. And in the coming 5 years, if we import more, the question is, do we import more from US or do we import from Qatar? More import should be from Qatar or from US. Now, wherever we get the better price or wherever our agreements of our companies would be better in better terms, we would be importing from that country. So in all this discussion, one thing is very clear, that India and Qatar's cooperation, currently bilateral cooperation, is quite close. Primarily, it is leading by the LNG supply which Qatar does to India. That is, the imports which India do from Qatar for LNG. That is the primary thing which fuels the relationship between the two. But other than that, we are diversifying our basket of relationship as well, where we will be focusing more on investments, bilateral investment treaties, plus different other sectors as well, including artificial intelligence, emerging technologies, which means we have been trying to diversify our basket. That is one thing. Now, second thing is that since Qatar has taken a very important geopolitical role, and geopolitical significance of Qatar has enhanced as a mediator in key geopolitical issues like in Afghanistan, in Israel-Palestine issue, Israel-Hamas issue, India's relationship with Qatar is poised to play an important role for India in engaging in regional matters indirectly, in these matters of the Middle East region indirectly. Also, Qatar's close ties with US on these regional issues, on peace efforts, it also paves the way for India to get a platform for engagement with the US on these regional issues, especially of Middle East. So basically, it gives a say to India as well, not a direct say, but in a way, it paves a way for India, where India could also engage with Qatar, who's directly a mediator, plus India is engaging with US, who's again directly a mediator, in the geopolitical issues in and around the world, which makes India more relevant in the contemporary geopolitics. And above all these things, for India's energy security and peaceful transition of India from non-renewable to renewable sector, renewable sources of energy, Qatar and India's partnership will play a very pivotal role. And definitely the partnership needs to be enhanced by 2030 because India's energy requirements are not going down. It will be increasing year after year, and that too it will have more than 10% CAGR, compounded annual growth rate. So the growth rate of our demands, the demands would be growing at more than 10% a year. Also, the supply should be growing even more, which is why the relationship is very crucial, and the strategic partnership recently, which both the countries have elevated to, that should be made more meaningful and more cohesive. I hope you gained a new perspective from this session. Do let me know what are your views around the engagement of India and Qatar, what lies in future for India and Qatar bilaterally. Do let me know your views in the comment section. I'll be very happy to read them. All the very best and have a very beautiful day. Thank you.